My name is Bill Swantner, and I am a certified master gardener in the state of Texas. My certification is through Texas A&M University College Station. My membership is with the Bexar County Master Gardeners Association, and we would like to welcome you to our YouTube series, All Things Gardening.
So let me introduce to you today's speaker. Patsy Inglitz is a native Houstonian. She retired to San Antonio in 1999, so she's been here over 20 years after working overseas for many years. She's a docent at the San Antonio Zoo, she's a master naturalist, and she's a very enthusiastic birder. She's received the National President's Volunteer Service Award for giving over 5,000 hours of volunteer service to the community. She's helped count and land birds in the field, monitor birds' nests, and educated countless adults and children about birds. She hopes that you will be informed, delighted, and inspired by this presentation. Patsy, on behalf of the Bexar County Master Gardeners, welcome. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me at this time. Am I coming through? Hello?
I hear you. Yes.
Very good, very good. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen then.
Perfect.
Okay, hope everybody can see the screen. Is it visible?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you so much. Well, I am just thrilled to pieces to be here this afternoon. I'm honored to be asked to speak to the Bexar County Master Gardeners. I appreciate your inviting me, and I also want to thank you for supporting this link between native plants and native birds. It's one that's developed over a really long period of time, and it is a very strong reciprocal relationship. And we Texans who nurture it, we will be rewarded. How? With beautiful landscapes that are appropriate to our area, to functional ecosystems and wonderful birds and other wildlife that those ecosystems sustain. Can't get better than that. And organizations like Master Gardeners and Autobahn chapters like ours, we're perfect partners. One of us knows a lot about plants and the other one knows a lot about birds. But we all know that birds and plants just naturally go together. You can't really have any kind of plant without attracting some birds. If you plant a shrub or a tree or a flower, they just happen to show up. But the question is, do we really want just any kind of plants attracting any kind of birds? Do we want the cookie cutter, undifferentiated residential landscape that we see all too commonly around us? Well, if we care at all about birds, and I'll tell you why we should in just a minute, the answer has to be no. Too much of one good thing is not a good thing for birds. A big open lawn with a few lollipop trees is not all that bird friendly. So what we need to do is to work together and to foster a new kind of beauty, a resilient, tough landscape that has a beauty that reflects our region and that is also beneficial to the wildlife in our region, including those birds. So why should we care about birds? Well, birds are extremely important in 4 key ways, and especially in Texas. So let me just quickly go through there and tell you why. First of all, birds are extremely important aesthetically. I mean, come on, people just love to watch them. Look at that beautiful painted bunting and listen to that lovely meadowlark. They just speak to our hearts. That's what birds do. And birds have been appreciated in that way ever since there have been people in birds. And Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring. And it scared people because it said, if we don't quit doing some things that we're doing, we're going to have no bird song. Well, that awakened a whole bunch of environmentally friendly people. And so that's what we're part of today. We entice birds to our gardens and to our feeders to divert ourselves from the pressures of our daily lives. And boy, lately, when we've all been kind of locked down and more close to home, this has happened. Birds have been the sanity factors in a lot of people's lives, and people are starting to really get more interested in them. And so I'm just thrilled about that. Now, birds are also important symbols, okay? Every state has a state bird, and we have a national bird, the bald eagle. Many sports teams have birds as their mascot because birds have characteristics that we admire and that we want to emulate. So not only do they bring joy to our life, they're worth money. They have a lot of value economically. In the United States, recreation is big business. And since 1987, it's grown about 30% annually. Bird watching is one of the fastest growing segments of recreation these days. Americans spend over 20 billion, that's with a B, per year on bird-related materials. Everything from bird seed to feed the little guys to bird equipment to going on bird expeditions. That's a little bit curtailed right now, but we can still watch them out of the back of our house. That's $20 billion. And then bird hunting, which is what my dad did, is a major form of recreation for a lot of people, and it brings in another $4 billion a year. So the economic value of protecting birds and having them around is anything but chicken feed. Now, ecologically, birds are important in every ecosystem, and they are a part of every ecosystem on the planet. They're everywhere. They function as pollinators, like our little hummingbird there, as insect and rodent predators, and as seed dispersers. And they don't charge us anything. And they don't pollute our water, our air, and our soil. So we take them for granted sometimes, but we really shouldn't. Scientifically, birds taught us the principles of flight. Took us a while to figure it out, but we figured it out. And also the idea of their distribution around the world has taught us about how closely related we all are, and all of our ecosystems and oceans are tied together. Birds have taught us that. And as it turns out, they're also very good bioindicators of how our environment is doing. Now, you may have heard the story of the canary in the coal mine. In the old days of coal mining, there were no instruments to find out if the air was still good for the miners. So they would take a little canary bird down into the mine with them. And birds have a higher metabolic rate than we do. So if the air starts to get bad, it's going to affect them first. When the bird fell off the perch, the miner knew that it was time to grab that bird and get out of that mine because the air was no good. Well, birds tell us now that our environment needs some attention, and to help them and to help ourselves. And so there are excellent indicators. And where birds are thriving, humans can probably do pretty well too. And they're also telling us now that climate change is an important consideration for us to think about. Now, when we come to Texas, I'm a native Texan. And I think Texas is a wonderful place. It's a great place for birds. People come from all over the world. It's an important state for birds. It's right in the middle of their migratory pathways. And we host, out of 10,700 bird species on the planet, there's about 700 to 1,000 in North America, depending on how you define North America. Texas gets about 670 of those species, either as resident birds or they migrate through. So Texas is very important to birds, and it's very important economically, ecologically, aesthetically, and scientifically here. Now, right here where we live in Central Texas, 2/3 of those 670, over 400 species, can be seen right here at one time of the year or the other. So that makes Texas very important for birds, and birds important for Texas. So if I've convinced you that birds are important, I want to let you know that birds are in trouble and birds need our help. Here's some examples of that just came out this last year, 2019. Cornell Lab of Ornithology published in the journal Science the sobering fact that 2.9 billion individual birds are gone from North America since 1970. They know this from the bird surveys over the time. Now, this does not mean, these are not just the rare birds that, live in very specific habitats. It's our everyday common birds that we love. Our state bird, the northern mockingbird, our great lovable cuckoo, the greater roadrunner, that not afraid of much, and UTSA has chosen it as their motto. Rowdy the Roadrunner is their mascot, because they're just these sassy little birds that are just not afraid very much. And then, of course, even birds that are so common, like our HEB bird, the great-tailed grackle that we see, and there are thousands here. Birds are being threatened all through their range and all over the United States. Now, let me give you a little bit more information about that in terms of the future. Another report that came out in 2019 from National Autobahn Society has a computer model that says if the climate goes up this much, this many birds will be affected. If it goes up a little more, then more will be affected. Birds are going to be affected if our climate continues to warm. And it said in the worst case scenario, 2/3 of North American birds are at risk of extinction. That's 389 species of birds on the brink. And you can see them popping up over there on that graphic. So what are birds telling us? They're telling us that it's time to act, time to do something to help the birds, and especially the ones that mean so much to us. And I bet you everybody in the audience has a bird story and has a bird that means something special to them for one reason or the other. So how did we get into this mess? Well, as a natural consequence of our population growth over time, we're now above 300 million in the United States, and we have to have a place to live. So housing density, you see it started up in the coastal areas of the Northeast, and then all of this has flowed together into what we call metroplexes. And everywhere there's a place where people live, a lot of times that takes away habitat from birds. And even this, what people call the green center, where a lot of our agriculture happens, is not all that bird friendly. A lot of it is monoculture agriculture for soybeans and corn. And it doesn't give birds very much habitat to perform the things that they need to be sustained. And we have transportation networks, energy networks, things like railroads, highways, roads, paths, and pipelines. And they all cut that habitat up into smaller pieces, and that makes it less effective for the habitat for birds. So what does that tell us? Well, it says that the human footprint is almost everywhere in our country and in North America. And that means that we humans have a role to play in helping reduce the impact on birds and to keep them from disappearing. In Texas, bringing it home a little bit more, in 2015, 4 of the fastest growing cities in the United States were in Texas: Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio. Now we look at our state and we see those metroplexes that are here. You have Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, and San Antonio that are growing together. Have you driven between them lately? You see they're flowing together. The greater Houston area, Rio Grande Valley. We're just a microcosm of what's going on all over in the United States. Now, in 2017, of the counties in the United States, more than half of the fastest growing counties in the USA were in Texas, and that includes Bexar County, where we live. So birds are under pressure, and it's under human pressure in many cases. So what can we humans do about it? Well, we study their habitats. These little balloons show you different places where birds can live, and this is in 1970. And we found that when we study it in 2017, that bird populations have decreased everywhere except wetlands. And that's where we put a lot of effort, time, money, and energy into preserving birds in wetlands. And so they've done pretty well. So what that tells us is we can do something if we just know what to do and get busy. Now, hill country bird habitat, this is our beautiful area that we live, but you know, we don't have to be told that preserving habitat and balancing that against growth and development can be very complicated. But we have to realize that saving our natural legacy is crucial, not just for the birds, but for the quality of life that brought us here in the first place, and to maintain that quality of life for us in the future. Now, I want to bring it down really close to my home. This is my house. This is 25901 Goldfinch Trail, right outside the San Antonio city limits, but still in Bexar County. So I'm living over there on the right-hand side, and there is a nature preserve behind us. It was that old good juniper, oak, woodland, scrubby stuff, but it was native habitat. Now, this was in 1998. Today, these are all my new neighbors in the same place. So what's happened to the habitat for birds? It's been replaced by habitat for humans. So we can't stop the growth, but we can do things so that we have less of an impact on the birds. So let's see what we can do. That's the positive part of all this. Now, Cornell University and Autobahn put this out, 7 things, simple actions that we can all do for the birds. Things like drinking shade-grown coffee, reducing plastic, recording what birds we see, making windows safer, keeping cats and birds separated, avoiding harsh chemicals. But I want to focus on that use native plants, because that can be a big difference for birds. Recent research has shown that even small native habitats can make a big difference for birds. And that's good news for us, because most of us have small native habitats. We call them our yards, our suburban, but it can be something big. It can be a small suburban lot, or it could even be, if you live in an apartment or a condo, something on your patio or out your window. Just a single bird, a single plant for a single bird makes a difference. And so all of us can do what we can at the scale that we live. And one of the things, especially those of us who live in more suburban settings, we have to fall out of love with lawns. Now, lawns are richly green, closely cropped, weedless, and insect-free. That's the idea. And they're turf grass. St. Augustine, Bermuda, zoysia, there's other ones. This is what they look like. It's America's biggest irrigated crop. 3 times more irrigated turf grass than any other irrigated crop. 40.5 million acres and growing. It's the area of North Dakota. Now just think what we could do. This is not good habitat for birds, but if we could just turn a quarter of that, a half of that into better habitat for birds, we would really go a long way to help them sustain themselves. And we also need to realize that this doesn't happen by itself. What do we have to do to get a lawn like that? We've got to put thousands of gallons of water. We've got to put chemicals like pesticides and fertilizer, and we've got to spend our leisure time pushing a loud, smelly old lawnmower around to make it appealing to whatever it is that we feel like we need to make this beautiful lawn. And of course, that's noise pollution and also air pollution. So let me take you to this is a typical suburban neighborhood. And it doesn't have, I just walked through my neighborhood not too long ago, and it has a woeful lack of anything in the way of bird habitat. So imagine if you're a bird flying over a classic suburban lawn. Now that is a bed of grass, usually turf grass, 1 or 2 usually young shade trees, and a row of leafy foundation plantings imported from somewhere else, either another country or another part of the US. Now for a bird, that must be like looking at a foreclosed fixer-upper in a bad neighborhood where the accommodations are sparse and all the restaurants are dives. Now you look at this thing, we see this all around us. And The fact that birds can live here at all is a tribute to their adaptability. But there's a lot of birds that don't do well in this. So it's time to learn for us to adapt a little bit to birds' needs. And here's the idea. We want to use native plants to turn suburbia into suburdia. And it's not that hard to do. So I want to talk to you about how we can do that. But let me show you what happens when we do that. Here are some beautiful native plant landscaped yards right here in San Antonio. Now, if you're a bird flying over there, it's like seeing a Park Avenue suite with a stock pantry and a view, with abundant food, places to nest, and a brilliant stage to sing from without having to compete with a lawnmower. And for the gardener, it means not having to spend every minute out there. Once you get it established, you don't have to water it as much, you don't have to put as many chemicals on it. And I'm a lazy gardener, and I like that a lot. So as responsible humans, we want to do this. We want to make native plant gardens part of the new nature. We can't make enough city parks, state parks, even national parks to sustain birds. They have to have bigger swaths of habitat, but we can each do a little bit, and it will make a lot of difference for the birds. So we want to make our gardens the new nature. And all we have to do is make it just a little bit better. Here's some of our native birds. We have a black-crested titmouse and a northern cardinal and a lesser goldfinch and our state bird, the mockingbird, northern mockingbird, and they're all sitting on native plants, okay? And if we just have one in our yard, it makes it better for the birds. Because we know that where people nurture native plants, birds thrive. They'd rather have that than food that we would give them, artificially in feeders. It's got all the vitamins and minerals they need. And we know that where birds thrive, people prosper. And how can we say that? Well, what's good for the birds? Clean air, clean water, clean spaces, safety is good for people. So by helping the birds, we're helping ourselves too. So it's a win-win situation. And it's not too late for us to do this. We can make a big difference. But now I want to pause right here and tell you that this is not a detailed how-to lecture. I don't want you to think that I'm an expert in anything. I do know a few native plants. I know the ones that I want in my garden and how to take care of them. But I'm not an expert in native plant landscaping. But I love birds. And it's worth it to me to do what is necessary to help them. So I'm pleading for your help. I'm really beseeching you for the liberal use of native plants. And I'm going to give you some ideas on how to do that to maintain our bird diversity that's so wonderful in Texas. And it really boils down to giving them what they need and withholding what they don't need, what could harm them. And probably some of the things I'm going to tell you, you say, oh, I already know that. I'm already doing that. Well, if you are, thank you. And keep doing it with a renewed realization that you're really making a difference. But if I do say something that is something you've not heard or something you have not done yet, then know that if you just add one or two things, it can make a difference for the birds. So how do we start? It's very simple. You think like a bird. Now, I love this picture because it's just so cute. But, thinking like a bird is not that hard because, as I mentioned before, birds need and humans need the same kind of things. So we say, well, what would I need to survive? Okay? And we say, well, I need food and I need water and I need a safe place to live. Well, when you look at gardening for a bird, you've got the same three aspects: food, water, and shelter. Okay, so if we look at our property from that perspective, if you were a bird and you look at your yard, would you find good, healthy sources of food? Would you find clean water, enough of it? Would you find safety from predators, a place to build a nest, shelter from harsh weather, or even just a safe place to spend the night? So thinking with the birds in mind and understanding their basic needs helps us work them into a plan. Now, this is a simple plan that we recommend, is to just sketch your present landscaping. Put your house in there and all the other things that you may have around and evaluate it from a bird's perspective. What could I do to make it just a little bit more attractive, a little bit more helpful to the birds? I can mark which exotic plants that I have and which native plants I have. The native ones I want to remove and sustain. The exotic ones, especially if I have it a lot, over time I want to gradually maybe replace those with native species that are more helpful. And remember that juniper and ball moss are both native plants, okay? They're very important, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. Then estimate how much turf grass that you have in your landscaping and resolve to convert at least 25% of that to something that is helpful to birds. Maybe it's a little water feature. Maybe it's a little pollinator garden. Maybe, something that takes 25% of that turf grass and it takes 25% of your work away as well. Think of it that way. And we want to be sure we're going with a neat meadow look. We don't want to achieve the vacant lot look because we have neighbors. We want to make sure. Now, the front of our house is neighbor friendly. Our back, we have about a little under an acre. The backyard is all ours. We have lots of native grasses. We let things go a little wilder back there because nobody can see it. There's a fence between us and the people behind us, so we can kind of do that what we want. So we want to consider those too. So what we're making is a yard map and a plan over time of how we might convert some of that. Now here's some things to think about. Birds need shelter from predators and bad weather, resting and nesting. So think natives, layers, and variety. The more variety we have, the more variety of birds we have. The layers are because some birds like to forage on the ground, some in the bushes, some in the lower part of a tree, some on the bark, some at the top. So we want to do our research so we know we have different layers and we want to have a variety of things. Sometimes we want to use rocks and logs and make little niches because some birds eat little lizards, some birds eat little bugs, and we want to have a place for those creatures so that the birds will have a food source. So we want a multi-layered effect. Don't want to forget the mulch because that keeps the water in and it also nourishes our decomposers. Some birds will scratch around in it and find things to eat. And it also suppresses weed growth and keeps our moisture in and so forth. So keeping these things in mind, the plants that you're seeing here, maybe some of them are like almost all native, but yeah, if you've got a favorite plant and it's not a native, doesn't mean you have to take them all out if they're not native plants, but strive for the majority of native plants. Now here's another thing that a lot of people go, what? Brush piles. If you're trimming your bushes, instead of putting them in the can to send them to the where they compost them, you can compost them yourself. Or if you have a place that you don't really see when you look out your back, you can make a little brush pile. And this is a great place for little birds like sparrows, smaller birds to hide. And it also of little animals that bigger birds will eat. If you have a tree on your property that's dead, the impulse is to cut it down. Well, if it's not going to fall on your roof in a windstorm, leave it. Some birds will feed off of it, the little bugs that get into the decomposing bark. Some birds will nest in it and they won't nest anywhere else. So snags are nature's apartment complexes. Leave them if it's safe. And if you have a non-native tree you want to get rid of, again, girdle it, let it die, and let it stand. And make a snag. Now, some people say, I just can't decide, I want to look at that. Well, plant a vine on it. Cut it down, make it a little shorter, plant a trumpet vine on it, and the birds won't care, and they'll still use it for what they need. And of course, the choice of plants. These are our nice plants. Now, nice means natives instead of common exotics. All of these plants are native plants. And here in San Antonio, we have 4 different regions, soils and so forth. And so we have to be sure that the plants what I can grow where I live is not the same as what grows in South San Antonio or East San Antonio. So we want to be sure that we're matching our plants, native plants, so they have the best chance to survive if you're going to purchase them. So people who do this, who go for the bird friendly, here's what they're doing. They're providing bird food factories that make regular deliveries of fruits and seeds, and these can help fuel migrations of thousands of miles and several continents. They're shipping caterpillars. We'll talk about that a little bit more, in bulk to grow the next generation of birds. That's very important in bird reproduction. So where can you get more information? Well, we have wonderful native plant societies. You have information at your disposal. Our local native plant society is wonderful. We have the Lady Bird Johnson Center here, very close, and you can go online. And we take our list of what we need and we go to a local nursery. Here's one, Rainbow Gardens, that I know has lots of native plants. But wherever you go, you say, I want this, this, and this, and if they don't carry natives, they're getting the message that they can't sell to you because they don't have what you're looking for. And the more we demand native plants, the more people will try to supply them. And here's what native plants do. These are all native plants, and the timing of their fruits matches the migration and breeding cycles of our native birds. They're there when the birds need it. Now, if you want fruits, you need to have a female plant, because some plants, as you know, have girl plants and boy plants, like the persimmon and the possum haw. But of course, you got to have a boy in the neighborhood too to make it all happen. But all of these, if you look at the size of the fruit, the color a lot of times is important because it gives nutrients to birds that adds to their plumage color. It's very important. Native plants are much better at that than the not native ones. Also, the size of the fruit, about 3/5 of an inch in diameter, is perfect for a bird to swallow it whole, digest the pulp, and then poop out the seed somewhere else and be a seed disperser. Okay, now mammals can eat a fruit, but they usually chew up the seeds, they destroy them. But birds, they have no teeth. They just swallow them whole and plant the seeds elsewhere. So these are very good aspects of native plants. Now, a lot of native plants produce high fat and high sugar. And in the fall or in the winter, when birds are either migrating or they're trying to survive the cooler weather, here we have the Cedar Waxwings, and they stay here until about May, and they take off up for the north to breed. Before they go, they eat a lot of berries. Now, a lot of those berries have high sugar content in them, and they've fermented a bit. So they kind of have a little goodbye party before they go. I've seen them eat so many fermented berries that they fall off the branch. That's not so good. But without those native plants, these guys wouldn't have the fuel to make that migration. Here we have a mockingbird eating hackberries. And boy, they are hard as a rock. They're adapted for our hot, dry climate. But once they go through a mockingbird, the seeds, the pulp, little pulp they have gets digested. The seed gets softened. When it gets pooped out by the bird, they can sprout. And they can't sprout if they just fall to the ground. They need a bird to help them grow. And that's why you see lots of them along fence rows where the birds sit and poop, right? And if you grow native grasses and things like Maximilian sunflower, let them go to seed. Don't trim off those old dead seed heads. That's food for goldfinches and our sparrows that come here in the summer and the winter, sorry. So leave them. And then some birds like our blue jay will cache like acorns and they'll keep them for the winter. Sometimes they forget one or two of them and they plant another tree for us. So we can do this with our native plants. And again, we make good choices about what we put in our garden. We want to avoid as many harsh chemicals as we can. We want to have things that are not only bird friendly, but family friendly for our whoever else is using our yard. Birds are kind of like little kids. They put everything in their mouth. And if you wouldn't put it in your mouth or see your child or a pet put it in their mouth, it's probably not too good to put it on your garden either. And the reason for that is the importance of insects, because a bird-friendly gardener is also an insect-friendly gardener. Why is that? Because 96% of birds, terrestrial birds, use insects to feed their young. Even if most of them, like the cardinal and the chickadee, they eat seeds most of the year. But when they're raising babies, they're stuffing them full of insects, because insects are high fat and high protein. They let those little birds grow up fast, get out of the nest where they're very vulnerable. So remember, green plants make all the food. Consumers, like birds, can't make their own food. They have to eat either the plant or something like an insect, like a caterpillar that grazes or feeds on the plant itself. And caterpillars for birds are like gold. Let me give you some examples. Here we have golden cheek warbler. They eat insects all year. But when they're breeding, about 10 minutes from my house up in Friedrich Park, they spend all day stuffing those babies with these fat, juicy caterpillars. And those babies grow fast, get their feathers, and get out of that nest where they're in danger. Our little hummingbirds, we think of them as nectar feeders, and they are. But when they lay those two little tic-tac size eggs, they start feeding the babies. When the babies hatch, they go catch a bunch of little gnats, and they make a slushy. They mix the nectar with all those good proteins, and they feed those babies, and you can almost watch them grow. 2 weeks or so, they're fully fledged and out of that nest. Our little chickadee, tiny little bird, it takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise 4 baby chickadees. They'll nest right in the snag in your backyard. They'll keep your backyard caterpillar under control. And one of the best plants you can have is the oak tree, because oaks have lots of little caterpillars, especially up in the ball moss and in the blooms of the oak. Also the ash juniper. So these are good sources of food. Now, of course, if you want to feed birds in leaner times, you can certainly do that. And the more variety of food you have, the more. This is our backyard. You can see how lush it is. We have about that much, it's about 1/4 inch of soil out there. But again, variety is important, and cleanliness to keep your feeders clean. 1 part household bleach to 7 parts water makes it all nice and clean. No red dye in the hummingbird food. And if you need help, the Wild Birds Unlimited people are wonderful to tell you how to safely attract birds with artificial feeding and so forth. And when you do that, when you feed them, they'll come close. You can sit in the back of your house and you can say, oh, look, there's 2 different kinds of yellow and black birds. There's the American goldfinch and there's the lesser goldfinch. These are here just in the winter. These are here all year. Right now, these guys are eating our thistle feeders down about every other day. We have to refill it. There's not a lot of natural food out yet, but once it comes out, they'll forsake us and they'll go eat the natural food. Now, we mentioned water, and it's not only quantity, it's quality. So whatever we do in the hill country, remember, it's a river that goes down to the Gulf. And this is our most famous native winter Texan, the whooping crane, that lives at the coast in the winter. And if it doesn't get enough water and enough quality water down to the bay where it lives, it doesn't get the blue crabs that it needs to survive and to go all the way back up to Canada and have its babies. This bird there was only 14 of them left in the 1940s. And we brought them back to hundreds now. But unless we take care of our water, they won't survive. So a lot of people use water catchment. Everything very simple to a barrel or a jar, even something more fancy. Some people like to put beautiful water features as part of their landscaping, and reciprocating pumps and all that. And look at these beautiful things. You can sit there in the afternoon and just watch the birds come in to drink and to bathe, which is also very entertaining, I might admit. Now, in our yard, we don't have that, but we have a bird bath. But if you're going to put a bird bath, be sure it's the right kind. The one on the left is not good. 2 things. It's too deep, and there's nothing around it for shelter if there's a predator. So this one is not one we'd recommend. Here we have a similar bird bath that's under a tree for shelter. It's in the shade. It has a flat rock in it so that the birds don't have to get into the deeper water. And it has also, we put a little dripper on there so that they can hear that water dripper and it'll bring them in. Of course, again, has to be kept clean for the birds. And they'll help you clean it real often because they're kind of dirty birds. So that one is much more bird friendly. And to mention a few of the other things we talked about, birds, I love cats, but they're wonderful hunters. And if they're allowed to roam among the birds, they kill 2 to 4 billion birds in North America every year. So this is a big stressor to bird populations that are already under other stresses. And of course, when we let them roam, they can run into danger. Here, I don't know what happened at the next frame, but I know in our neighborhood, we've had a number of people who lost their cats that they let roam to coyotes, because we have a lot of coyotes in our area. So it's better for the birds, it's better for the cats. And some people even build catios, and they let their cat outside and they keep them away from the wildlife and the wildlife away from them, and yet the cat can enjoy the stimulation of what's going on outside. I think that cat has it made. Now, the other thing that we have happen sometime is you hear this thump, and you go out and a bird has hit your window. Well, there's something we can do about that too, because most of them don't survive that kind of impact. Birds can see ultraviolet, and we can't. So we get this tape. Sometimes it's in the shape of something, but sometimes it's just tape. This is what we see, and this is what the bird sees. To a bird, it's a no-fly zone. And we can have there's all kinds of products, but we have to decide that we want to do that. And there's also little string, little dealies that you can make that'll move and keep the birds from hitting your windows. Again, bird-friendly products, if it's safe for the entire family, it's going to be safe for birds. And there's a lot of traditional remedies that work on plants, and we don't have to go with these extremely toxic things. And as I mentioned before, plastics, you've probably seen the pictures of the big islands of plastic that wash out from the land and in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Well, this endangers not only seabirds, but the creatures of the sea, like our turtles and our marine mammals, as well as the fish, of course. And even the coffee we drink for breakfast can make a big difference for birds. This is the only kind of coffee I drink. I went to a coffee growing area in Costa Rica, and I saw 2 kinds of coffee farms. This is the way coffee is traditionally grown and the way it naturally grows. This is coffee, and then it grows under the taller trees where the birds can roost. This is what we've done with coffee. We've bred it so that it'll grow in the sun. Well, it's much more acidic coffee. And look at here, they cut down all the rainforest, and so all of this is no longer habitat for birds. Now, we have a very good brand locally, Ruta Maya. It's grown in Chiapas, Mexico, and it's roasted in Austin. You can buy it at H-E-B, you can buy it at Costco, and it's delicious. It doesn't have that acidy effect on you either. There are other you can get online, Birds and Beans, just if it says bird friendly. That's what that means when you're talking about coffee. So to put it all in a nutshell, it's just being conscious to be a green, sustainable life cycle, recycling things and using organics and limiting water, limiting our energy use. All of that is helpful. We know that we all have to do it. Our resources are limited. And when we do that, we not only help ourselves, we're going to help the birds as well. And here's our reward. Look at that beautiful landscaping. It's got things for people, it's got lots of stuff for the birds, and we can bask in the beauties of our labors. We can take pride in showing it off. We can tell our neighbors about the benefits of using native plants. As I said, I'm a really lazy gardener. Once you get these things going, you don't have to water them like you do other plants. You don't have to put those chemicals on them. They're tough little dudes. and I grew up in this environment, and they'll survive for you. And then you'll start bringing birds into your environment. You have your hummingbirds, and oh, look at this painted bunting, and a whole nest of little, those are your grandbirds. If they're on your property, they're definitely your grandbirds. And when they start coming to your yard, you might want to know what they are. You might want to know their names and what are their specific requirements, so you can maybe get a plant that they would really like or some water that they would like. And you might want to learn more about birds and birding. And that's where Bear Autobahn can come in and furnish you with a birding skills workshop. And once you know their names, there's a little app as I'm holding up my phone called eBird. And you can map your house on it, and you can keep a list of all the birds that come to your yard. And it's good to do it before you do a lot of landscaping with native plants, if you haven't done any, and then watch how the number of species grows as they come to your gardening that you've done. Now, after the workshop is over, you're going to have access to 2 handouts. One of them is called the Bird-Friendly Gardening Checklist, and it covers a lot of the things that I've talked about today. And there's little boxes mentioning all these things. And the more of those little boxes you can check, the more of these practices that we follow, the more bird-friendly our gardens will be. And we don't have to do it all at once. We can do it a little step at a time as we can. Now, Autobahn, the National Autobahn Society, has a native plants database, and we can access that. We have a resource sheet that will be the second handout that you get, and it'll have how to access this database and a whole list of books and other resources for you to get into this native plants thing. And Autobahn, even if you want to put a sign in your yard and let your neighbors know that I'm doing this on purpose, I'm doing it for the birds, I'm doing it for nature, well then that's just great. You can, for a modest donation, you can get that for your yard. Now, once you get your resource sheet, you can go onto the National Autobahn Society database, and you put in your email address and your zip code. And the zip code is tied, to where you live, and it will give you a list of plants that will grow in your zip code, native plants that will grow in your zip code. And it will tell you which birds and which insects, especially butterflies, that it will benefit. So you have your little schematic, the things you want to do in your yard. You have a list of plants. So you say, oh, I like that one, I like that one. You go down to your supplier and you pick out your native plants, and you come back and you've got your first steps into native plant gardening. It's really that simple. Now, there are other books that you can look at. Autobahn Society has a guide to attracting birds that goes on beyond just feeding and so forth. Laura Erickson's book, 101 Ways to Help Birds, is just general lifestyle. What you can do and with the birds in mind that will help them instead of hurt them. But this is the one I want to end with. An entomologist named Doug Ptolemy, some of you may have heard of him, wrote this book called Bringing Nature Home, How You Can Sustain Wildlife with Native Plants. He's kind of the godfather of this whole meeting, this whole idea. And this was, probably 10 or 15 years ago, and it has really taken fire. Here's what he says on the very, very first page. For the first time in its history, gardening has taken on a role that transcends the needs of the gardener. That's us. Like it or not, gardeners have become important players in the management of our nation's wildlife. It's now within the power of individual gardeners, like us, to do something that we all dream of doing, to make a difference. And in this case, the difference will be to the future of biodiversity, to the native plants and animals of North America, and the ecosystems that sustain them. And I would add, that sustain us as well. So let's get busy. Let's just start with one plant, or revise your whole landscaping, whatever you want to do. It's great. Anything is helpful. We bring nature home, and Doug Ptolemy's second book is Nature's Best Hope, a new approach to conservation that starts in your yard. It's very inspiring and very helpful. So we can be what hope looks like to a bird. And that makes me feel really good. If you take care of birds, you take care of most of the environmental problems in the world, not just in your yard. So that is pretty inspiring and empowering as far as I'm concerned. So I invite you to do that. I want to thank you for having me today. I really enjoyed making this presentation to you, and I want to thank you for nurturing native plants and native birds. And if you want to learn more about birds, we would love to have you come to some of our meetings. We're doing Zoom and remote meetings now too. We love birds, but we also realize that birds are part of ecosystems. And so our programs cover a wide variety of topics that have to do with that. Here's our website. It'll be on the information that you get. It's just bearaudubon.org. We have a wonderful website and has a lot of information, and we love to hear from you, what your progress as you do this native landscaping and making this happen for the birds. So as stewards of our land, we have never been so empowered, but the ecological stakes have never been so high. So the birds are depending on us. I know you won't let them down. I know you'll help us, and I thank you again for having me come. Now, if you have questions or comments, I would be happy to do the best I can to answer them. And if I can't answer them, I'll try to steer you in a direction where you can find an answer. So thank you very much again.
So Patsy, we do have a question.
Okay.
One of them is, how can you attract orioles to a yard?
Orioles, oh, they are fruit junkies. And if you put, there's little things you can get at Wild Birds Unlimited that it has like a spike on it, and you take a half an orange and you put it on the spike so that they don't knock it off the fence or something, or you can do it with nails if you want to. And you put that out there when they're migrating through, and they will find it and come. They really like that. And they also like, you can get little feeders where you put grape jelly, and they don't like the peanut butter so much, but they like the grape jelly. And they have got, I guess what you might call a sweet beak. So any kind of native plant that you put in your yard that has more succulent fruits, they will go for them. But most of the orioles are just kind of coming through. You know, they're kind of migrating off to somewhere else, but they really do appreciate that kind of offering.
Right. Thank you so much, Patsy. We really appreciate your joining us today.
Well, thank you. And I'll sign off now. I know you have your business meeting. And if anybody thinks of a question or a comment that they'd like to make, please email bearaudubon.org. I'll be monitoring it, and I'll be happy to answer any questions later. So you guys have a great afternoon. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Patsy. All right. So Patsy mentioned 2 resources, and we will send links to those in our leaflet coming out next Wednesday. If you're a member of the Autobahn Society, reach out to Patsy. She'll have those resources available to you through your organization. And if you're just a guest joining us, if you'll send me an email at info@bearmg.org, we'll make sure you get links to those resources also. So thank you again, Patsy.